I had hoped you might find this place and finish our work, but it is too late. You and the Templars have squabbled over our refuse. You have wasted centuries, and so you have lost your chance. You cannot hope to stop the end now, Desmond. Only survive it. Minerva, 2012. Hello and welcome to Visions of the Past. My name is Andrew, and I'm the host of this Assassin's Creed lore podcast. This is episode 61, where we take a deep dive into the event known as the Second Disaster. Before we get into what the disaster is within the Assassin's Creed universe, let's take a look at the inspiration behind the disaster, the moment in time that has come to be known as the 2012 phenomenon. This phenomenon was dominated by the idea that a handful of cataclysmic events would occur on or around December 21st, 2012. You might be wondering why that date is so specific, and it comes down to being regarded as the end of a 5,126-year-long cycle in the Mesoamerican long count calendar. Some believe that this date marked a period where everyone on Earth, or the Earth itself, would undergo positive physical or spiritual transformations, while others thought that the date would bring one of a handful of cataclysmic scenarios like the arrival of a solar maximum, the period of greatest solar activity during the sun's 11-year solar cycle, the Earth interacting with a supermassive black hole at the center of the galaxy, or even the Earth colliding with a mythical planet called Nibiru. Mayan scholars stated that there were no classic Mayan accounts that forest impending doom, and that the long count calendar ending in 2012 misrepresented Mayan history and culture. Astronomers even rejected the doomsday scenarios as pseudoscience. Within Assassin's Creed, the disaster has only been shown within Assassin's Creed 3, but it has been mentioned within Assassin's Creed 2, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, Assassin's Creed Origins, and Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Before we get started on what the Second Disaster is, the first thing you need to know is that it ties directly into the Great Catastrophe that I talked about on episode 18 from April 2020. The TLDR, though, is that the humans in Isu were so focused on their war with each other that no one noticed a coronal mass ejection coming until it was too late. This mass ejection had enough power to flip the Earth's magnetic poles, which caused fires and earthquakes, and ended up leading directly to the extinction of the Isu. The Isu did notice the Great Catastrophe coming soon enough to test some solutions, but they did not find anything in time to stop it. One more thing to note is that with talking about the Second Disaster, we will be going into major spoilers for Assassin's Creed Valhalla and its ending. Once it was realized that the Great Catastrophe wasn't going to be stopped, Minerva looked forward using the Nexus to figure out the most probable scenario, and using a device called the Eye, she communicated with people in the future in an attempt to stop the Second Disaster. The first known message from Minerva was received on December 28, 1499, within an Isu vault under the Sistine Chapel in Rome, by Ezio Auditore da Firenze. This message was designed to use Ezio as a conduit to deliver the message to Desmond Miles, who on September 15, 2012, relived the memory of Ezio's. This message, while it did interact directly with Ezio, was designed to warn Desmond about the upcoming disaster. Along with the warning, Minerva marked the Apple of Eden that Ezio had used to open the vault, and confirmed that humans were created by Isu, and it was a war that broke out between the races that kept them from seeing the Great Catastrophe, and to prevent the upcoming disaster, Desmond needed to find other Isu temples and artifacts, and to be wary of the Templars. Ezio took this information back to Monteriggioni with him, but he didn't understand what it meant at all after discussing it with his fellow assassins. All conversation about Minerva's message came to a stop when Ezio relayed that he did not kill his target, Rodrigo Borgia. After this meeting ended, and the Borgia attacked Monteriggioni on the morning of January 2nd, 1500, the apple was taken from Ezio's Uncle Mario, setting Ezio on a course to not only retrieve the apple, but to remove the Borgia from power. Eventually, Ezio did do this and recovered the apple that Minerva marked, and he hid it within a vault located beneath the Santa Maria Araceli in Rome. After Desmond received the memory of Ezio's that contained the message, the cell of assassins that he was in decided to continue through Ezio's life to find out what happened to the apple, believing that they needed it to stop whatever was coming. After finding out where Ezio had hid the apple, the cell traveled to Rome on October 11, 2012, and as Desmond found his way through Rome's Colosseum, the other members of his cell found a different way into the vault. On the route to the apple, Desmond heard a message from the Isu Juno about the differences between Isu and human senses, and that Desmond would be the one to activate something only knowing when it was too late. Desmond did pick up the apple from the vault, but at that moment, it took control of his body, leading to him to assassinate Lucy Stillman, a member of the cell he was in, and he fell into a coma. During Desmond's coma, he was placed within the Animus, where his consciousness met a virtual construct of clay chasmeric. Clay had put his consciousness within the memory core of an Animus after Juno had convinced him to help Desmond to complete his mission and to get to the Grand Temple. When the Animus tried to delete the consciousness of both Clay and Desmond, Clay held him close, and as he started to be deleted, he pushed Desmond into a sync nexus. Traveling through the sync nexus, Desmond found himself face to face with Tinia, who told him to go to the Grand Temple to try one of the 6 solutions to keep the second disaster from happening. Awaking from his coma on October 30th, 2012, Desmond found himself at the Grand Temple with his father, William Miles, and other assassins, Rebecca Crane and Sean Hastings. During the apple that Minerva touched to enter the temple, Juno forced Desmond into the life of Haytham Kenway as they made their way through the entrance. During the forced memory, Haytham gained an amulet that Desmond needed to open the inner chamber of the temple. While reliving Haytham's memories, Desmond found that Haytham had a son, and that it was this son that had eventually hidden the amulet at the request of Juno at the Davenport homestead near Rockport, Massachusetts. After waking from his coma on October 30th and finding the amulet on December 20th, Desmond recovered multiple power sources for the temple from across the world, learned of the 6 ways that the Isu tried to stop the Great Catastrophe, and received emails from Juno, pushing him to stay in the Animus longer because time was short, and that while she still could, she had thrown messages from Minerva and Tinia into the Great Chasm that was near the door to the inner chamber. Once the cell got back to the temple from getting the amulet, it was late December 20th, 2012, and the cell entered the inner chamber and found a device that looked like a ball on a pedestal. Before Desmond could do anything, he was visited by Juno, asking him to touch the pedestal to save the world, but they were interrupted by a message from Minerva, asking him not to. Minerva went on to explain that Juno lived within the walls of the temple, and that if he touched the sphere and saved the world, she would be released, and that it would be better to let the world burn than to release Juno. When she said this, Juno asked if that was really true, and to show Desmond what would happen if he didn't save the world. Desmond was then shown a vision where the world would burn, but not end. After coming from the Great Temple, Desmond resolved to lay a foundation so that this tragedy would never happen again, and become a symbol for those who survived. After his death, the legacy that he built, meaning to encourage life, would be used to justify taking it, starting the world down a cycle that would end the same way. After seeing this, Desmond knew there wasn't enough time to save the world outside of the pedestal, resolving that the others would find a way to stop Juno. Touching the pedestal shortly after midnight, the morning of December 21st, 2012, Desmond activated a global Aurora Borealis device, saving the world from a coronal mass ejection at the cost of his life, and releasing Juno into the gray. In August 2018, Juno's scheme of cloning an Isu body to inhabit was foiled when assassin Charlotte de la Cruz killed Juno and Juhani Otso Berg set off an explosion destroying the lab in Australia that created the body and the body itself. After Desmond saved the world, the Earth's magnetic field continued to strengthen, and sometime at the beginning of 2020, a strange message was deposited in the assassin's encrypted servers from an unknown source north of the Arctic Circle. The message was broadcast for 9 days and then ceased. This message was from an unknown male that claimed to have seen an end to what was coming, and to save everyone, they needed to find someone called the Wolf-Kissed, and was known as the Mad One. Within the message were coordinates to a Norse gravesite near Concord, Massachusetts. By May, a team of assassins that consisted of Layla Hassan, Rebecca Crane, and Sean Hastings had found the gravesite and started to use DNA from Eivor Varen's daughter to relive her life and find out why she was the key to saving the world. During an early break, Layla listened to a news report stating that the Earth's magnetic field had increased by a factor of 50,000. This report also stated that this increase resulted in disturbances in radio and satellite communications, dangerous bands of radiation around the poles, and an aurora borealis that wasn't burning away. During this report, a Dr. Circa stated that the scientific community doesn't know why the magnetic field was increasing, and that if they can't find out how to change it, the way humans live, communicate, and maybe even the way they evolve could be changed forever. Eventually, Layla explored enough of Eivor's life to find out that she found a temple in Norway, and after talking to Sean and Rebecca about what she had seen, the group realized that it was this temple that the global aurora that saved the world from the second disaster came from, but it never turned off. It kept growing its magnetic field until it got to the dangerous levels that it was currently at, and that they needed to go and slow it down, as turning it off completely would leave the Earth unprotected from another mass coronal ejection that might arise. Sean speculated that over the last 8 years the machine was on, the temple was filled with radiation and heat, and that to get to the controls of the machine, Layla would need to use the staff of Hermes Trismegistus because of its powers of healing and granting the user physical immortality. When Layla made it to the vault, she used the same Isu phrase that Eivor had watched Sigurd Stryborn's son use to open the vault, and when she descended into the vault itself, she lost contact with Sean because of the radiation and the amount of ice on top of the vault. Once Layla was deep enough into the vault, she came across the Yggdrasil device. Making it to the center of the device, the machine reached out and attached itself to her back, causing her to drop the staff of Hermes Trismegistus. The device connected to Layla like her animus did, and put her into a glitchy simulation similar to the one Eivor saw during her time connected to the device. Within this simulation, Layla met a digital representation of Basim ibn Ishaq, a hidden one from Eivor's time. During their conversation, Layla learned that it was Basim that sent the message to find Eivor's grave. Basim also told Layla that the Isu's vaults and artifacts are connected much like the modern-day internet, and that while his mind was still tethered to his body, that is, connected to the device, he is able to read future calculations with another, known as the Reader, and that another catastrophe was close at hand, and presented her with a pedestal that closely resembled the one Desmond used to stop the second disaster. When Layla touched it, Basim disappeared, and Layla found herself next to what looked like a tree with a being seemingly made of nothing but light, looking at it. This being, the Reader himself, spoke to Layla about the odds of her finding him and how they improved over the last 8 years. He also explained that he has been looking at ways to stop the catastrophe from ever coming back, always starting at the day Layla slows the machine down that has been protecting the Earth, but that in the millions upon millions of possibilities, it always ends with another catastrophe and the world is destroyed. During the conversation, Layla introduces the idea to go back to when Desmond stopped the second disaster, allowing for billions more possibilities, thinking that maybe if he had let the world burn, that someone would have learned from the disaster and found a way to prevent it from happening again. With all the timelines that the Reader now had to look through, Layla chose to stay with him to read these possibilities, in a hope to find the solution before another catastrophe came around. The Reader informed her that radiation within the vault would kill her body in just over a minute. Layla shrugged off the comment, believing she still held onto the staff of Hermes Trismegistus, but the Reader reminded her that she did drop it. Choosing to stay and let her body die, Layla and the Reader started to read the timelines as her consciousness turned into the same kind of light that his did. As this was going on, Basim's body fell from the Yggdrasil device and landed on the staff of Hermes Trismegistus, which restored his body and allowed him to leave the vault. Layla sent a message to Sean and Rebecca that told them what her plan was and that they shouldn't come and find her, as it was too dangerous and too late, and they needed to keep the world safe until her and the reader could find a lasting solution. One of the things that I've always liked about the second disaster is how it ties the idea of the 2012 phenomenon into Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed has always excelled at pairing conspiracy theories and real history together, and this is no different. After we see the events of Assassin's Creed 3, we find that each game leading into it, even the first Assassin's Creed, gave the idea that December 21st, 2012 was important, even with the idea that that was just going to be the launch of the Abstergo satellite. There is one line, though, in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood that has always led to confusion for me, and that line is, "The final journey commences. There is one who would accompany you through the gate. She lies not within our sight. The cross darkens the horizon." This line from Juno was not really touched on within the last 10 years of Assassin's Creed. A lot of the community looked at Desmond as a representation, descendant, or even the rebirth of Adam, and that he needed to find his Eve. But after the stopping of the disaster and moving from Desmond's story, it seemed like we'd never get a real answer to what the line meant. The release of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, though, brought us back to what happened in 2012 and brought this line into question again. By the end of the game, we see Layla meeting up with the reader, who clearly is the consciousness of Desmond after he stopped the second disaster from happening, showing Layla and Desmond in the gray as beings of light, looking at the calculations that take the form of a tree, bring forth imagery of Adam and Eve, looking at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. While this might not have been the original intention when the line was delivered and the storyline of Eve was first explored, it does serve as a nice way of ending that plot thread. Now that Desmond and Layla are working together, Desmond can find a way to fully stop the second disaster and not just delay it. Tying Layla into the story of the second disaster also brings her whole story into focus. With the empirical truth within Assassin's Creed Origins, we know that Layla's mind is different, and that it could find a way to break nodes in time, or times that could not be avoided. And the idea of the heat and radiation within the vault, and exactly what happens after she ends up in the Yggdrasil device, it shows how she was truly manipulated within Assassin's Creed Odyssey. For me, what happens to Layla at the end of Valhalla was a good way to bring her character redemption and leave her open for a return, along with Desmond, once the story progresses to a point that returning to them and breaking the node makes sense within the modern-day narrative. Thank you for joining me today. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for new episodes. If you love the Visions of the Past podcast, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on Apple Podcasts. If you have any questions about Assassin's Creed or topics that you'd like me to cover, please feel free to hit me up on Twitter and Instagram at visions_AC, and you can find those links in the show notes below. Until next time, my assassin friends, make sure to follow the creed, and to those Templars listening, may the Father of Understanding guide you.